Hello, hello, can you guys hear me? All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Quick housekeeping before we get started. I am going to have to ask all of you to please close your laptops for me as we bring out our guest speaker in a few minutes. We are going to be live streaming this on YouTube for our online students. So what we'll do is it will be about a 1-hour guest lecture, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A from all of you. So when you get the mic, okay, we're going to pass some mics around during Q&A. Please wait until you get the mic for your question so that we can hear it on the live stream as well. And when you have this mic, just try to hold it up to your mouth as much as you can so we can hear you real loud and clear. Please also make sure that your cell phones are silenced. Please take a moment to do that. We don't want any buzzing or ringing during the talk. I can hear the phones going off. Thank you. All right, we're going to show a quick intro video, and then I will come back out to get us started. All right, thanks so much. Good afternoon. I'm Jackie Otero, the Program Director for Entertainment and Music Business Bachelor's Programs here at Full Sail. And I'm very excited to be hosting a very special guest for you all today. He is a 30-year veteran of the entertainment industry, and he's done all kinds of things on the road, everything from tour accounting to tour management, tour security and logistics. He's most currently been on the road with Blake Shelton on his recent tour. He's getting ready to head out here in a few weeks. He is his road manager. He has a very interesting background and all kinds of information to share with you, managing risk on the road. How many of you guys have seen a concert in the last year? All right, that's a good majority. How many of you have read in the news any particular challenges that we've had with security or safety at different concerts or festivals? Have you been reading about that? Seems like a couple times a year there's some kind of disaster that happens at a live event. And that's really Mike's specialty, is preventing those types of things from happening. So any kind of security concerns, from being backstage and making sure that the talent is safe, keeping them away from fanatics who might be back there up to no good, to keeping track of who's in the entourage and how are people behaving, looking into safety concerns with their equipment. There's a lot of different aspects that go into managing risk on the road. So please help me and give a warm welcome to Mike McGrath.
Thank you. Thank you for coming, everyone. And thank you to the online students for being there as well. There's a couple reasons I wanted to do this. This first is because I think it's a very important topic, considering what's going on in the world today. But I wanted to do it specifically here because on the tour over the years, you meet a lot of people, and sometimes you'll catch yourself at lunch or dinner with somebody that you don't know, and you start chatting. It's like, well, how did you get in the business? And I can't tell you how many of them say, I went to Full Sail. So I can tell you that coming here works. It does translate to the touring world. I had a friend last year who went to a school, engineering school up in Nashville. And when he got out, he said, man, can you help me get into the business somehow. So I got a hold of our audio vendor from the tour and said, man, how does somebody get into audio on a tour? And he said, man, he says, I get resumes and calls all the time. What we do is we go to Full Sail to get our people. So I don't know if you just lucked out coming here, if it was a specific focus, but I can tell you, good job. The other reason is because my son, Zach, is a student here, so he's the reason I'm here. We'll get the slides up there. There we go. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. I've been touring for 30 years. For the past 28 years, starting in 1988, I've been exclusively headlining, doing arenas and amphitheaters. I've got a lot of stories, and a lot of them will be in here today. In 1991, I was on tour. I was a tour manager for the Judds. It's a mother and daughter act. If you know country music, you'll remember them. They were huge back in that era. And we had a security guy. His name was Snipper. And Snipper had a drinking problem. And unfortunately, I can talk about him because he ended up passing away. But he had a problem, and anyway, we parted ways. And the two ladies said, man, we really don't want to hire somebody else on the tour, somebody that we don't know. Can you do security? And it made sense because since 1975, I've been heavily involved in martial arts. And even though that doesn't directly translate into being executive protection or security on the road, it does indicate a passion or a focus for safety and security. So starting back in 1991, everyone I met, whether it was a local, state, federal law enforcement, military, special forces, bodyguards, I'm always picking the brain of specialists that I work with. And I always take notes. I've got files and files of notes in the computer here. So what I tried to do was narrow a lot of it down to a 1-hour slideshow presentation here. So obviously it's just a snapshot. This is just an introduction. Some of the points that I'll bring up will seem obvious to you. Some of them may seem unusual or odd. Hopefully a lot of them are new, something that you hadn't thought of before. Because it's important to think about this stuff now before it's needed. If you do go on tour as a production manager, tour manager, something like that, any kind of leadership role, a certain level of safety and security is going to be inherent in that role. So it's a good thing to focus on now, and when you're interviewing for a job, you can say, hey, listen, I like to focus on safety and security. That's going to be a good buzzword. People are going to like that. I've never done a PowerPoint presentation before, so I'm kind of learning out how to do this as we go. Planning. These are some of my favorite quotes about planning. The fact is, you can't make up something as it happens. If you're in your house and you have a fire, it's not like, man, what should we do now? It's better to plan ahead. And I don't know if there's a trash can here. Here's an example. If there's a trash can here, and if Jackie had said, listen, we have a problem on camp. For some reason, trash cans start on fire a lot. Knowing that would be nice, but wouldn't it be better if I said, okay, I understand that trash cans start on fire. There's one over here. If that happens, everyone leave out that door. You go get the fire extinguisher. If you don't know where it is, go find it now and learn how to use it. And if you, on your way out, would call 911, I'll go over and start stomping on it. Now, that took me like, I don't know, less than 30 seconds to explain, but isn't that a much more efficient plan than just like, what are we going to do? And that's also a good thing for if there's ever an accident or somebody hurt. Instead of just saying, somebody call 911, it's much better to say, you call 911. Now we know it's going to get done. It's efficient. I saw 2 studies, actually one was a video, one was something I read, about how the brain makes decisions in chaos events. One was presented to leadership at West Point, military, and it was about close quarter combat. And it was explaining the process of, or comparing if you had previous training or not previous training. And I'm making it sound simpler than it is. It was much more in depth than that. But what they discovered was, obviously the people who had previous training performed more efficiently, and the reason is your brain in an instant goes through a list of options when something happens, like what can I do? And if there's nothing to pull from, there's nothing, you're not going to react. The other one was victims of rape, women. And what they found out is a lot of women didn't seem to, you've heard of fight or flight, you either run away or fight. A lot of women did not do either, and they're like, why did that happen? Well, what they discovered was there was another thing called freezing. And what caused it is when they went through their list quickly in their head of what I can do, a lot of them didn't have anything to choose from. That's why reading something about self-defense, taking a self-defense course, at least gives you some options to pull from. So pre-planning is key. This is one of my favorite quotes from Taylor. I have security because there's a file with stalkers who want to take me and chain me to their pipe in their basement. I just thought that was interesting. If you look online at emergency procedures or anything like that, you'll find a ton of things on earthquakes and fires and active shooters and things like that. So because we're limited on time, I didn't want to go through all that. So what I did was I went through and chose what I feel makes our industry special. Are most of you in some kind of entertainment or music program here? Okay. Well, here's what I chose. Evening activities. Obviously, if it's a concert, it's mostly at night. If you're a publisher looking for a songwriter, a lot of times it'll be a showcase. It'll be at night. Exposure to fanatics. And I usually write it that way because I don't want to say fans, because most people are fans. If we do an arena show and there's 12,000 people there, they're all fans, but that doesn't mean they're all bad. There might be one in there that might cross the line, and that's why there's security around the stage, and you can't get backstage, and we have credentials, not because 12,000 people are going to try to jump on the stage, but it's because maybe there's one. So when I talk about fanatics, that's how I write it. Online resources, that's something that's exploded since I started in this business. Just the information you can get and the information you can send out online. Frequent travel, you're going to be on a bus, you're going to be on a plane, you're going to stop at truck stops, you're going to be in hotels. That's kind of unique to our business. Mass gatherings. As we've seen in Paris, there was a sports stadium and a concert hall. Any place with mass gathering is considered a soft target. The culture of celebrity. That's a little harder to explain. That's talking about the people in your entourage. If one of you has a friend that's in a band and you start working with them as they're small and they explode and now they're headlining arenas or stadiums or something like that, that person is going to change when they become a celebrity. It's just natural. You have to. All of a sudden they can't go out and walk around in the mall. They can't go out to eat without somebody filming them. And frankly, you're probably going to change too, because now all of a sudden you're going to be riding in a limo, you're going to be flying private jets, you're going to have celebrities coming backstage and you're going to be meeting them. So that's what I'm talking about there, is how that can change you or affect your entourage. It also happens when an act has been around for 10 or 12 years and they start going down and they start losing that. We have some management firms up in Nashville actually have life coaches on staff to help people with this transition, or if it's a band, how do you get along? Because you're living with your bandmates 24/7, and if you argue, you have to learn how to figure that out. So this is roughly the outline for this presentation today. Basic safety. It's hard to ask you to provide safety and security for a tour if you don't know how to provide it for yourself. So I'm just going to go through this real quickly. I have a 4-hour personal protection course that I teach in the music industry, specifically for people who are on tour and such. And this is like a whole hour, but I'm just going to go through this real quick. Be aware and trust your intuition. I could actually put that line on every slide here. I could actually stop right now and walk away, and that's the most important thing. To be aware of what's going on around you. Intuition is something that we all have when we're young. I bet your children have it better than most people. For some reason, we lose it when we get older. It's that feeling that's, man, something's just not quite right. It might be a feeling in your stomach or the hairs in the back of your neck. But so many times as adults, we're just like, now we're overreacting. But you have to learn how to get back in touch with that, because it's your body telling you something. Exude confidence and don't be a victim. When you think about, you watch a wild show and there's a lion going after a gazelle, it doesn't go into the middle of the pack and get the strongest one. It gets the weakest one, the slowest one, the one that's maybe isolated from the pack. It goes after that one, and a lot of that is the way you carry yourself. So that's key. Physical and emotional inventory. You've got to think, do I have any limitations? I just had a shoulder problem for the last year and a half where I couldn't reach back. So if I need to deal with something, I know that that's a limitation. If you have a bad knee, maybe you can't run. The emotional inventory is what happens if a catastrophe hits. Do you freeze? Do you get angry? Do you cry? You have to know how you're going to react naturally. And a good way is if you've ever had something happen in your life before, that's probably how you're going to what's going to happen again. So it's a good idea to know that about yourself and to identify, do I want to learn other ways to deal with the things. Fear and adrenaline. Most martial arts schools don't talk about that enough, but you can study martial arts for 40 years, and when something happens, if you get this adrenaline rush and this fear, which is all natural, you freeze up and you lose your fine motor skills. That's a whole topic. Consequences of altercation. If you're out at a club with your artist and something happens and somebody jumps at him and you end up beating up the guy, you might think that you win and everybody next day is congratulating you, but you don't, because there's going to be a civil suit, there's going to be a criminal suit, you might go to jail, you might lose your job, there's going to be bad press, it might affect your family somehow. So you've got to think ahead of time. The mind of a sociopath. That's that one person out of the 12,000 who doesn't think like us. We all think a certain way, things that we would do. Some people just think outside the box. You've got to recognize that. Here are the steps to do if something happens. The first thing is to avoid it. And you can avoid something if you're aware. Next is to de-escalate something. If somebody's mad, try to talk them down. You say, man, let me understand what's up and let's see if we can fix your problem. That's always a good thing. Escape if something happens. Disable is the last. That's the reason it's the last word on that slide, because it's the last thing you want to do. Scotty McCreery from American Idol. I had just done he was a sport act on one of the shows we did, and this happened in a college town. He was over at a friend's house. I was accused of possibly living in a what-if world. That I'm always thinking, what if this happens? What if that happens? So I use actual examples of things in this presentation to show it's really not a what-if world. This kind of stuff really happens, and it can happen anywhere at any time. Let's talk about these fans that crossed the line here. First of all, a lot of them know the artist or the band, or at least they think they do. When you think about it, it's easy to go online. You can find out who your spouse is or who the boyfriend or girlfriend is. Do you have sisters? What's the name of your dog? What's your favorite food? Where do you live? You can find so much information about somebody, so it's natural for a fan to think that they know this person. But obviously the artist doesn't know them. The hazards of social media. As I mentioned, not only is there a lot of information that you can get from social media, but you can also spread a lot of things on there. You can take a picture with an artist backstage, like at a meet and greet with a bunch of people around, and look like you're hugging, and edited the right way, it can look like you're like making out with the guy or something. So that can be dangerous. This next one is really unique. Behavior based on location or setting. You can take a fan, and say you're going out the back door of the arena, and you're walking to the bus, and they say, hey, can I get an autograph? And you're like, yeah, sure, you sign an autograph. Let's say you go to the hotel, and that same person is maybe inside the hotel near the elevator. Say, man, can I get an autograph? Then it's like, okay, caution light, yellow light. This is kind of a little weird that you followed us to the hotel. If the artist goes home, and that same person is at the front gate or at the front door, says, man, can I get an autograph? Now it's like, well, red light. The same person doing the same thing has different consequences based on where it happens. So that's something unique to our business. Also, boundaries of personal space. If you don't know somebody, if I'm delivering a package to you, we're about 2 arms distance. Here's the package. If we're friends, we're about 1 arm distance. But think of how many times a fan comes up, say you're eating somewhere, and you run into an artist, and they run up and say, oh, I love your stuff, and they hug him, and can I get a picture? And now all of a sudden they're like all cozied up. And that would be weird if it happened to you, but it wouldn't be weird if it happened to Taylor Swift. It would be normal. So it's really different being a celebrity. A lot of them feel a sense of entitlement. Like, hey, I was the first fan, I was with you from the beginning, or I drove 3,000 miles. There's this whole psychology. And they will seek out a weak link. We had someone that we were watching on a Rascal Flatts tour one time. We told security, hey, don't let this person back here. And then all of a sudden the person was back here. It's like, how did that happen? We found out that she had met the bass player of the opening act, and he brought her back because he wasn't informed. So they will. I had someone one time, we were signing autographs near a bus, and I had security, and I thought it was really secure until somebody crawled under the bus and came up. This guy killed his wife, 2 children, and his mother. I got a letter from him in the early 90s, said, hey, a child died, can I come backstage to a Winona concert? And I was like, oh man, yes, obviously. So it was in Northern California, the guy comes out, we meet him, take pictures. Next time through Northern California, he writes again, said, man, my wife died. And I was like, man, I can't believe this guy's got bad luck. The next call I got was from the police, and they found out this, and it's something called, it doesn't matter, but it's called Munchausen by proxy. And what it is when you hurt or kill people to get attention or sympathy. Apparently it's like one of the first cases, but I knew this guy. It's weird. Some more things about fans. Again, be aware, listen to your intuition. If something just doesn't feel right, it's probably not. Beware of getting too close to the fans. The one thing you can't tell is somebody's intent. And if you don't know somebody, and they say, man, you come on over to the house after the show, as tempting as that might be, you've got to be careful. A touch or a glance can be misinterpreted. I've seen one time a female artist went up to a guy and touched him on the shoulder and said, man, I'm so glad you're here. Come back and see me sometime. To him, it was like, hey, she touched me. She wants me. She said, come back and see me. That means I need to go out to her bus after the show. So it can be misinterpreted. Avoid using vague language. If it's a guy in a meet and greet, a male artist, and some girl says, hey, let's get together later on, he shouldn't say, oh, I can't do that because my girlfriend's here. Because of the wrong person, that means if the girlfriend wasn't here, I'd have a chance. So you need to be clear and direct. And also don't say too much. One mistake I made in the very beginning of my career was somebody would say, man, can I get an autograph before you go? And I'd say, no, we have, she's been tired, she's been working all day, we've got 700 miles to go, she hasn't eaten, and they're like, yeah, but can I have an autograph? And I realized that none of that matters, so you just have to say, I'm sorry, this isn't a good time, be direct and don't say too much because it doesn't work. I was Reba McEntire's tour manager, and this happened right before I started with her. The Grand Ole Opry is a legacy venue in Nashville. And these 2 girls up in Ohio, one was I think 17, the other was maybe 21 or 22. They ended up killing the landlady so they could steal money to go to Nashville to take hostages and force authorities to bring Reba to them. Now this is stuff that you see on TV or something like that, but it's actually stuff that really happens. More fan stuff. Be cautious of accepting gifts. A lot of times they'll think, hey, I'll give you a gift, you need to give me something. Most of the times it's, hey, I gave you 3 dozen roses, I need a backstage pass. And then you say, no, it doesn't work that way, and they get mad. You should open the mail for the artist. You shouldn't let them, because it might be something, something rude and unacceptable that they don't need to see. Don't eat food given as gifts, obviously, because you don't know what's in there. And a side story about food. I was working with another act one time, and it's common to get food after the show, and a lot of times it's pizza, which is great for me. I love pizza. But usually you mark it like artist bus, band bus, crew bus, or something like that. And this guy was marking the boxes like from the store. He has the store mark them like X, Y, and Z. I'm like, what does that mean? Why do you do that? He said, man, because one time I marked it for the artist bus, and it came back, and I opened it up, and he said it looked like somebody swept the floor and dumped it on the pizza, and inside was written, you suck, you don't deserve the notoriety, and all this kind of stuff. So you got to be really careful with food. Use code words. I did an outdoor event. I was actually working security for this one. It was 3 artists, and it was outside, we lined all the people down the road, and they wanted to sign as many autographs as they could. So I said, okay, listen, you always call me Mike. I said, yeah. I said, if you call me Michael, I'll know that that means something's wrong, and I'll come be by your side and deal with it. Good cop, bad cop, it's your job as the tour manager, road manager, whatever, to be the bad cop. If you're signing autographs and it's time to go in, you're the one that says, hey, come on, we need to go. And then the artist is going to say, no, I want to keep signing, And you're like, no, we got to go now. You know, you want to be the one that looks like the bad guy. Let them look like the good guy. Meet and greets. At every show, what a lot of people outside of the business don't understand is there's really two schedules that happen. There's the production schedule, the load in, sound check, doors, and all that stuff, show and load out. But there's also a lot of other stuff going on with sponsorships, radio, fan club winners. The latest thing that's happening now are these VIP packages. There's a whole bunch of stuff. So let's talk about meeting backstage. My brother was a security guy in Van Halen in 1984. That's why I chose that pass. When you choose a place to do it, the building looks a lot different during the day when there's nobody in there. So you have to make sure you know where the people are coming from and where you're going to walk the artist from. Make sure you're not walking through a public area. Make sure it's convenient for both sides of that equation. You have to utilize an area where you can control and have the option of leaving every time. The best room is something with two doors. Like if we were doing a meet and greet, had a backdrop right here, we'd have the people coming in this door, but we would have that door where we could get away. You always give a little speech before the meet and greet. You line up, and what I like to do, something I learned years ago, I try not to use too many negative words. So instead of saying, you can't use your camera, you can't get more than one autograph, instead of saying can't, what I'll do is I'll say, hey, thanks for coming, my name's Mike. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to get to meet the artist, you're going to get an autograph, and you're going to get a photo with him, everything you want. But we have a lot of people in a short amount of time, so let me tell you how we're going to do it. We're going to use our camera, so you don't have to use yours, so you got to turn it into a positive. If you have something to sign, have it out and ready to go, we'll sign it. So I just think that sets a nice positive mindset. And tell them, we don't allow alcohol in. Selfies is a big thing. We try to avoid that. Because if you're meeting 100 or 200 people each night, the quicker you can do it, the more efficient you can be, the better time everyone's going to have, actually. And it's different depending on what kind of group. If you have a group of fans, you can do that. Everybody come here and line up against that wall. We did something one time, I can't remember who the artist was, but we were in Washington. It was a bunch of congressmen, and they were talking about digital royalties. So, and they were all in like suits and gowns, and I wasn't going to say, okay, line up back there. It was more like, hey, my name's Mike. The so-and-so artist is going to come in here in a few minutes. We're going to mingle a little bit, get to chat with them, and then I'd like to do some photos. So depending on who is in your group, you do it a little bit differently. These are some tricks that I learned along the way. If there are 200 people here and everyone gets a photograph, that's 200. So what I'll do is, hey, how many in your group? And hopefully you can trim that down a little bit. What I'll also do is, well, first of all, when you do a meet and greet, there's a few positions. There's somebody who works the front of the line, somebody who maybe takes the pictures, and somebody on the other side. And I like to be the one that meets them first. And if they're holding a code or something, I'll say, hey, can I hold that for you? And what that does is it gives me a chance to look them up and down like this without looking like a freak. It's like, man, can I hold your coat for you? And what I'm looking for is anything weird in their hands. I had a friend who was a tour manager for a guy who was a hot guitar player and had a meet and greet person that had a razor blade in their hand one time. So ocular pat down. And if I'm suspicious about somebody, I'll start chatting them up. Say, hey man, where are you from? And all that stuff. And if they're, mad or something like that, I'll try to figure out why. And you might not want that person through. If they're drunk, you might not want that person, or you might want to be really cautious. Some of them, a lot of times, they'll say, hey man, can I have a kiss? And I'll say, no, why don't you get a photo instead? So you can kind of direct things in that way. Social media. I heard an interview with a basketball player, and he was saying that in the old days, there were always problems when you had away games. There were always people calling you a bum, throwing things at you, hope you lose, whatever. And then when you get on the bus to leave, that would end. And he said the thing nowadays is it never stops because you got Twitter and so on. So you go home and you read it, and people are still threatening you and calling you a bum. So that's something that's changed a lot. Alabama. This is the kicker a couple years ago. I think he missed a couple field goals. They lost the game. So, of course, people want to kill him. You're going to die tonight. I'm going to kill your family. Ridiculous. There's a massive amount of information available online. And here's the thing. Probably half of it is true. And I know that firsthand. Once something is out, you can't get it back. You all know that if you send something, send a picture, you can't call the police and say, man, can you get that picture off the internet? It's like, well, no, not now. It's gone. I call this stuff digital courage when people do threats, because I figure there's some creepy guy up in his bedroom of his parents' house and he's sending out all these threats and stuff like that, because he wouldn't do that to your face. It's important to teach everyone involved, whether it's your spouse, your fan club president, the receptionist, how to capture something if there is a threat, because you don't know if it's the first of many or if it's an isolated thing. And if 2 years down the road this turns into a big stalking case, you want to have some documentation. The last thing is just what I said. Everyone needs to be involved. It doesn't do any good if just the people on the tour know about this. Everyone related to it needs to know too. Here's something else. This guy's going to stab her in the heart and cut her head off and cut her parents into pieces. So just, some lovely stuff. The press. I filled in for a couple weeks with a group called Lady Antebellum. And my first show was in Pittsburgh, and this was in the paper the next day, so I just thought it was funny to throw up there. One thing is when you're the tour manager or road manager, there's a lot of stuff going on backstage. You may go to a radio station for an interview. I would never walk them into a room and say, I'll be back, and leave them alone. One time with Winona, years ago, there was somebody, she said she was from a radio station. All day long she was bugging me. She wanted to get an interview. I said, no, you need to call the record label. It needs to be pre-approved. And finally, somebody from the other radio station, a big one, said, man, she's new in town. Could you help her out? So I said, okay. So I bring her up on the bus, and she sits down next to Winona, and she says, hey, you redheaded bitch. And I'm like, oh, crap. So, all right, come on out. So, imagine if I wasn't there. You should always know what's going to happen when you go in. How long is the interview going to be? What's it going to be about? So that you can tell the artist and they know what to expect. You should also listen in, because sometimes, and mostly guys interviewing women, sometimes they'll say something inappropriate. And you can either stop it there or you can go back afterwards and say, listen, this was said and we want you to take that out. Pre-skiing all liners. If you don't know what a liner is, if you listen to the radio and you hear somebody say, hey, this is John Mayer and you're listening to the best music in Florida, that's what a liner is. And usually after you do an interview, they say, hey, can you read these liners? And they give you about 10 of them to read. And what you got to be careful of, and the reason you and your position needs to screen them, is because if it says something like, hey, this is John Mayer, this is the only station I listen to in Florida, the other stations are really going to be mad. So you've got to be careful of things like that. And of course, there's going to be bad reviews and critics. And if you've seen, is it Jimmy Kimmel does the mean tweets? There's going to be that, so you have to develop a thick skin. I just looked at a note, and I forgot to mention this earlier. I did a show, I guess about 5 or 6 years ago in Texas, and it was for George W. Bush. It was a golf tournament for wounded veterans. And as is common with this type of event, there was somebody assigned to me as my liaison, and she drove me around and showed me where the stage was, where to park, so on. And I said, well, I know you do this like 1 week a year. What do you do the rest of the time? She said, well, I'm Laura Bush's personal assistant. And being intrigued with things like that, I said, man, tell me. I said, you must have gotten the best security training on the planet from the Secret Service. She started laughing. I said, what's up? She said, man, they said, here's your training. If anything happens with the First Lady, we're taking her and leaving. And she says, well, what about me and the rest of us? I said, no, we're just taking her. So that's one part, but then a couple years ago we did 20 arenas and amphitheaters. And I do a security meeting at 4:30 every day, and the last thing I say is, we have 12,000 people out there. I'm sure you have emergency evacuation procedures for them. So yeah, we do. We do an alarm or whatever. They go to the parking lot. And I said, now there are 100 of us backstage. Do you have special rules or instructions for us, and only one of the 20 did. So those two stories kind of got me thinking, you know what? We as a tour need to kind of step up our game. We're the first line of defense for ourselves, and we need to think about this stuff. Where are we? Buses. This was a quote from a friend of mine that I used to work with who's in a band. I'd left the group, but he was in Denver. Some woman had a couple bags of ice, opened up the bus door and came up, and everyone's like, oh, cool, come on in, you know, because that's a common thing that happens at the end of the night is somebody from the venue or catering, but it was very, very smart of her to do that. Always lock the doors and the bay doors where the luggage is, because even if you're in the bus with some people and you lock the door, people could still go underneath and steal your stuff. Don't hesitate to ask unknown guests who they are. I can't tell you how often that happens. Someone will be sitting up there, and I'm thinking this one time where there's this woman, and she said, hey, when's Gary coming out? I said, well, who were you with? And she said, nobody, I'm just waiting for Gary. She was waiting for the singer from the other act, and she was just kind of hanging out on our bus. I thought she was with you, and you thought she was with me. And so you as a leadership position, again, don't feel afraid to walk in and see somebody you don't know and say, hey, who are you? Who are you with? Or something like that. It's your home away from home, so treat it like that. Don't let people... there was one time where a couple women came up and said, hey, can we use your bathroom? And the band guys were like, yeah, come on in. I'm like, no. You don't just walk into our house and do that. So get out of here. That's just me. This sounds kind of weird. Maybe have a system for counting passengers. Twice last year, we had instances where we had really early flights. We were on the bus to go to the airport, and somebody decided that instead of staying awake for 15 minutes, they would go lay in their bunk for a couple minutes, and they were left there. We were supposed to fly out of LA, and he woke up in Arizona or something. That happened twice. So you, again, as leadership, you need to know, okay, before we roll, let me make sure everybody's here. A couple years ago, there were a lot of fires. There were like 5 or 6 bus fires. And what a lot of people don't think about is, like when you go to a movie theater or you're flying and they say, there are exits to the right and left or something like that, that's really, really important, especially on a bus. There's only one door and it's up front. The engine's in the back. So what if you do if there's a fire in the back, or if it tips over, how are you going to get out? Each bus should have at least 2 fire extinguishers, one within reach of the driver, and the other one usually is down below near the generator, but it's important to know that they're there and to know where they are and how to get to them and how to use them. A lot of the newer buses have air doors. You push a button and it opens like that. And if it doesn't work, which happens often, it's really hard to get open. You can do it. You can put your palms like this and you push it, and if you let go, it'll snap shut. But if there's a fire and that's not working, that's a problem. Same with windows. Some of them are electric. You have to know if you can break them out. Maybe you have a baseball bat on board. Something a lot of people don't think about until something happens. This is actually at a bus company up in Nashville. They suspected somebody was stealing things. It was a former employee. So I put on here, when key employees are terminated, you might want to change the code on the bus so that somebody can't get back and steal stuff. How are we doing on time? Good, because I've still got a lot here. Ground transportation. A lot of times you're going to be in a car, and you got to remember that we don't know this guy. You know, it might be a runner from a show, and you're putting an artist or their family in a car with somebody that you don't know. So always get their information. Make sure they know exactly what the plan is. You know, what airport you're going to, what venue, do they know how to get to the backstage. And this third one is kind of worded weird on purpose. I had an instance with Reba one time where we flew in and did an appearance. And when we were leaving, I called the limo driver, says, man, is the car ready? He says, yeah, come on. So we go upstairs and we go outside, and the car, it was a lot of snow, and the car was way down at the end of the parking lot. And there's all these fans here, and I'm standing here with an artist, and it was really awkward. So now, anytime I'm going to bring an artist out, I always make sure I come up, say, where is this the car right here? This one's right here. Don't move. Yeah, most of these things come from mistakes that I've made. So try not to separate yourself from the baggage. There are sometimes you'll be in a van with a group of people going to the terminal, and the luggage is maybe in another one. And it just happened last year where it was a big airport, and the luggage went to a different terminal. They got confused. So of course we can't check in because we don't have the luggage, so you need to coordinate that. No one other than the driver in a vehicle. Whenever I arrange transportation with a limo company, I always say that. And it sounds weird, but it's because it's happened before. Car will pull up, we'll go to get inside, and there's somebody sitting back there. It's like, oh, who the heck is this? Oh man, that's my wife. She's her biggest fan or something. You know, so you have to say that. Also, if it's the kind of car that has partitions, close it, lock the doors. It's been known for a long time that drivers can be a source of tabloid news because they listen to a lot of conversations, or can. Hotel stuff. Use alias name for the artist. If it's a female artist, don't use a female name, because if somebody gets the copy of the rooming list and there's one female name on there, they're going to know that that's the one. So it's probably a good idea to use something gender neutral. Always keep an extra key to the artist's room with you, and I guarantee you'll be a hero someday, because they're going to say, oh man, I can't get in my room, I don't have a key, and you're going to go, I got one. It's awesome. You got to do that. When you go into a room, when you're bringing an artist or a principal in, just go in there and walk around real quick and take a look. Obviously to make sure nobody's in there, make sure it's clean. But sometimes there will be, song lyrics from the service staff, or a tape or something, or some gift, and that shouldn't happen, because nobody should know that they're there because you're under an alias name. So go down and complain. Know where the emergency exits are, and that's important in anything that you do. If you go to a restaurant, if you go to any room, always look for a secondary exit. That's just a safe thing to do. Try to get in that habit. Always lock your door, and I always use my do not disturb sign, always. I never use the service requested one, because that tells people that nobody's in the room usually. So I don't use that, because I have cash and contracts and stuff like that. This next one here is interesting. I went out to lunch with a bandmate one time, and as they were leaving, they were like, hey, well, I'll be right back in a little while. I said, man, who's in there? I said, nobody. I just have my recording stuff, and I don't want these service people to think that it's empty. Stand away from elevator buttons. What I always do is I'll push the button, and then I'll go to the furthest corner, because if I'm standing near the buttons, somebody come in and say, hey man, can you push number 3 for me? And while I go like this, he can get me. Or if he reaches by me, he's close enough to attack. And I know that's the whole what if world thing, but I try to be safe. Flying. It's really interesting to fly with a celebrity. If you can communicate with the airlines, see if they have any kind of VIP services, or maybe go into the club that they have. It's a little more protected. You can talk to the SkyCap. They're really useful. If you're running late, they can maybe help you get through. Keeping the artist moving is really an important thing, because sometimes by the time they recognize who it is, you're already gone. And a fun story about that, I was with Rascal Flatts. I was their tour manager, and we had a place called the Ryman in Nashville. And the back door was under construction, so we had to go out the way the people went out. And I said, man, it's going to be like 15 minutes before all these people. He said, man, let's just walk through there. I said, okay. So we just kind of walked real fast. We didn't stop. And if anybody did see him, by the time they were like, man, isn't that the band? Then we were already gone, because we didn't stop. The artist you can say, hey, man, hold your phone up to your ear. And then if somebody's like, hey, Mr. Artist, and you're like, maybe fist bump him or something like that, but it gives you a good reason to keep going. TSA PreCheck is an awesome thing to get. Windows versus aisle. I always like to be on the aisle in case something happens. It's a good idea for the celebrity or the principal to be at the window, because people can't get to them. Let's talk about the show. Credentials. This is something I'm working on right now for this tour. It's kind of fun to design. The all-access pass. Do we need other kind of laminated pass? Do we need a meet and greet pass? We need a satin pass that needs to be escorted. Do we need a satin pass that doesn't need to be escorted? Does the Support Act have something? We like to give the Support Act all of our own credentials, because we can control them. We let them use their own meet and greet pass. If the sponsor has a wristband or something, you got to get a sample of that. I have a short security rider that I send out in advance. If they have questions, they call me. We have a meeting at 4:30 every day. We go through all the particulars of the tour and the placement of the guards. If something happens, the venue always has reports where they say, hey, last night we had 6 people intoxicated, 1 guy passed out, there was a fight. it's good to get that because you never know if something's going to lead to a lawsuit down the road. Different types of venues have different needs, and two of my favorite words are control and consistency. Arenas, you have the most control and consistency. In amphitheaters. Fairs and festivals, you don't, because you might be one of 10 acts. You know, the act that was on at 1 o'clock maybe brought their family back, and maybe they're still hanging around by the time you're on at 9 o'clock at night. So you really don't have the control. The best you can do with something like that is you can control security around the bus, the dressing room, the stage while you're on there. And what we do is we say, only our passes are good for the stage. Even if the festival has passes they gave to everyone, we lock it down. TV shows always have great security. If you go year after year, you get to know them. Private shows are a little tricky. I always call it convention mouth, because you get these people coming, they're out of town, they hardly ever get out of town, they get drunk, and it's a whole different thing there. This was nice. This was in Kansas City, and I had gotten word that that poster was out. So I actually called the FBI that morning and said, man, I hear this Westboro Baptist Church is going to be out. And he said, man, let me tell you what's going to happen. They're going to be across the street. They're going to be there from 6:45 to 7:30, and then they're going to leave. He said, you won't have any problem. So what I did was I told our entourage that, man, you're going to see these people out there. Don't harass them. Don't yell at them, because what they want is attention. So just ignore them. I just thought that was interesting. On stage, see what's going on up there? If someone gets on stage, it's important that you have a plan to get that person off the stage. It's most likely you're going to have some backline techs up there, guitar, keyboard, drum techs, and they may not know what to do, and they may not want to be involved. So I like to find somebody who wants to have this job. If somebody gets up there, it's your job to go get them. You know, and here's how you do it if they want to learn how to do it. Because you got to think, lights. This guy was good because he was kind of out of the lights. But people are going to be filming that. It's going to be on YouTube the next day. Guards kind of do what they tell you. There's a famous fire. Famous might not be the right word. Have you heard of the station fire? It was in 2003, I think, and the group called Great White was up there, and the club started on fire. A lot of people died. Exactly 100 people died. Right next to the stage, there was a door. And with the building on fire, he wouldn't let people out the door because his job was to let only the band people out. So people died because he didn't let them out that door. So just know every day you're going to have somebody different. It might be off-duty cops. It might be retired people. It might be college students. If something's thrown on stage, it kind of depends on what it was. If it's flowers, that's fine. I've heard stories of dog brains, feces. So, if it's a dog brain, if it's a Taylor Swift show, that's probably bad. If it's, I don't know, what else? Insane Clown Posse, maybe it's okay or something. Handling hecklers, it kind of depends on what the artist's personality is like. I would recommend that they get online and look at how comedians handle hecklers, and you can say, man, I like that, I could use that. Have a plan in case of emergency. If the power goes out, if there's gunfire, you should have a plan. More backstage stuff. We doing okay on time still? Okay. It's important that the guards stay, and this happened at a festival last year. The artist had a trailer. When they went to the stage, the guard left. And I'm like, what are you doing? I said, now's the time when somebody's going to go in there and steal stuff. Can steal his backpack or his laptop or something like that. So sometimes people don't think, especially at these festivals where they only do it once a year, they might not be professional security people. Find out if there's anything else going on in the building. Sometimes you'll be back there getting ready for a show and you'll see all these tall people come by. It's like, what's that? It's like, man, it's the basketball team. Their rehearsal room is next door and they're walking through. So it's good to kind of anticipate what's happening there. If you escort the artist somewhere, it's important to me, because I'm really bad at directions. Once somebody shows me how to get to a room, I make sure I walk it both ways, and I walk it by myself so I'm not distracted. And I like to do it early in the day and then again at night, because at night it might look different. There might be a bunch of road cases stored there. It might be in a public area. So that's important to know. And if it's a really tricky place like a casino, one trick I learned years ago is to get colored dots. And I'll go down this long hallway and I'll put a blue dot up here, and that means this is where I turn. And a Secret Service friend of mine told me this trick, which was awesome. They have reflective dots, and in hotels, they put them down low. And so if it's smoky, smoke will rise, and you can go down like this, and if the power's out, you can flash your light, and you see these reflective dots to lead you out. I'm going to skip by a few things just to make sure I cover everything. The entourage. I specifically used this picture to remind me of this story. This was near the end of a tour in 2014. It was taken from stage right, looking down there. And this is right before dinner. It was about 5 o'clock. And right after this, we all went backstage that way to go have dinner, go back to the dressing room or whatever. And as we were all going back there, I saw this woman by herself. And I thought, she's not a stagehand because she's not dressed like a stagehand. She doesn't look like she works for the building. She doesn't have a radio or any kind of credential. And she got in with the group and started going back down the dressing room hallway. So I got a security guard and said, hey, go get her. And they brought her back, and sure enough, she just snuck in somehow. I said, well, who are you with? She said, I'm with Blake Shelton. I'm like, okay, well, who? Anyway, so bad timing. As I'm doing this, Blake comes walking by. And she's like, Blake. And that's like, oh, man, that was a failure. That wasn't good. But that's the kind of thing that can happen. And if I didn't use my intuition, thinking, something's not right, I could have easily said, she probably works at the building, and walked by. With the tour personnel, this is something we're doing Friday night. We have a meeting at the beginning of the tour with everyone to kind of give them some guidelines. We have non-disclosure agreement. Choices, decisions, and consequences. I've got a friend who's a head of security for an NFL team, and he told me about that. That's what they do for the players. It's kind of how to protect yourself from yourself, how your actions can affect in negative ways if you're not smart. This was, I forgot what year it was, 40 rowdy and intoxicated Rascal Flatts crew. Now, the interesting thing about this is Rascal Flatts, if you don't know them, the principal is it's 3 guys. None of them are on this flight. 40 of our crewmates were on the flight, but not one of their names was mentioned. But the name that they did mention was Rascal Flatts. And that's what I mean by how your actions can reflect on the artist. The interesting thing here is we loaded out. We got done with loadout about 2 o'clock or so. It's a 5 o'clock flight, so they weren't drunk and rowdy. They were happy because we were going home. When we get 40 friends together and you're having fun, they just misinterpreted it. It was not fun. If you're working with an artist, you need to be the one that's sober because you need to be responsible. Artists, after a while, they kind of, I call it blinders, where they kind of look down as they walk because they don't want to maybe engage a lot of people, so you need to be aware for them. Again, know where the exits are. Remember, if you get into any kind of an altercation, you're with your artist or principal, and you get into something over here, they're standing there by themselves, so you don't want to do that. Video in public, if you're eating at a restaurant and somebody comes up and starts videotaping you, they can do that, unfortunately. The only time you cannot is if you have a reasonable expectation of privacy, like if you're in the bathroom. They can't do that. Workers' comp. These are actual, this is documentation from 2 things that happened. This here was in Texas. And do you see that cable from the second step going over to the concrete? This guy was going to walk under the stage, and he tripped and went down. And an interesting sidebar here is when I went down there, it took 5 minutes for the medical personnel to get to him. That was way too long. So now when I have my meeting, I tell them, you have 1 minute to respond to us. This guy ended up breaking his femur. And I got a report from them the next day. This one over here is a venue up near New York. And somewhere after dinner, somebody said, hey, Mike, high tide's in. And I'm like, okay, I don't really care, but because I didn't really know what they meant. So what happened is one of our lighting gals, she was in bare feet, and see the cables down there? You can tell what's coming up. She reached down to move some cables, and have you seen somebody get shocked before? So she was frozen, socked, and laid down. She's in the water being shocked, and one of our video guys grabbed her, and he started getting shocked. And they both had to be transported to the hospital. She had holes on the top of her feet. because apparently when electricity comes through, it has to exit somehow. So it was like blisters. The video guide did not, and that's the one that they were worried about because it didn't exit. So luckily we got them back at midnight. But the thing is, you need to document right away. If I didn't take this picture within the next half hour, that water would have been gone, and we wouldn't have this documentation. Each state has a report. For Tennessee, it's called the C20, First Report of Injury. It's important to document it right away because you don't know. Even if somebody says, man, I fell and hurt my wrist, a month from then you might find out that it's broken. This is actually a picture from that station fire where there was one exit basically because they weren't allowed to use the other ones, and so they started falling down and stacking up on top of each other. It was bad. This is different types of things that I said were available online, things that you need to consider. So I didn't go into detail on these here. Final thoughts. You're the first line of defense. You can't wait for the fire department or the police. You should have a plan until help arrives. Be proactive. That's much quicker than being reactive. Educate everyone about the plan. Obviously, it doesn't work if everybody knows. Something I just remembered, one of the things in Paris happened. The merchandise guy was killed. And when you think about it, we have a bunch of people backstage, but you have the merch guy out there and you have the front of house guy, the lighting director. They're kind of away from this safety plan here, so they're kind of more at risk. And if you haven't seen the interview with the front of house guy for, what was the name of the band? Something of death metal? Yeah. There's an interview with him. It's really interesting where he was shot at and his buttons were blown up. And again, trust your intuition. Well, I buzzed through a lot of that stuff at the end, just because I wanted to make sure we had time for questions and stuff.
Mike, before we go into Q&A, hello? Before we go into Q&A, I just want to say thank you so much. That was amazing, the amount of information that you blew through.
Thank you. There's so much information to cover. I mean, this could be like a whole course. So I just picked some things that I hope would be interesting and try to cover a wide area.
Yeah, this is truly a crash course. So
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We have time for questions. So we're going to have a few mics going around the room, and then we'll also take questions online for any students joining us online. So who'd like to start?
Come on, I know you all are talkers.
Hello. Hi.
Hi.
I'm Mike. I just wanted to know, how do you deal with like new technologies? Although you mentioned the selfies and stuff, all of us like use Snapchat and those type of platforms nowadays. So it's like, do you brief the artists about what type of instruments are people using to like take pictures or record the moment, or you just like do your own rules and
I'm not involved in that, and actually my generation has kind of gotten lost. The technology has moved past, even though I come from a technology background. But I think that's something more that a publicist would make them aware of, and they stay on top of things like that because they're always monitoring the public exposure and the communication like that. And it's not unusual to have a new media person there as well that helps with that stuff. So usually that's like another department. Come on, we got a lot of time here. Yeah. Hey.
Hello. You as the director of security and everything, if I'm correct, do you usually work with new bodyguards and everything assigned to different artists, or do the artists usually have like their own set of bodyguards that are kind of like informed?
That's a good question. And at the very beginning of the presentation, I don't even remember this slide now, but we talked about safety, security, and risk management. And let me go through those first. And for my definition, safety is protection against some natural occurring thing. It's like having good tires on your car so that you don't slip, or if you hit glass, you don't get a flat tire. Security is more, I'm going to lock the door so somebody can't get in. Risk management is about protecting the personnel and your assets and your reputation and money. And I had somebody from one of the large booking agents in Nashville call me last year and said, man, we've got this actress moving from LA, super big actress, and she wants security. So I says, well, what specifically? He says, well, what do you mean? I said, well, it can mean, security can mean a lot of things. Do you want some big guy to like escort her to award shows and stuff? Do you want a vulnerability analysis? Do you want somebody to go to her house and say, hey, you need a fence, you need these kind of locks, you need cameras? Do you need investigations because maybe she's got a stalker? Do you need threat assessment? If you ask 10 people what security means, you're going to get 10 different answers. If you have a full complement of security, there would be like a personal security person who travels with the artist. And in our case, Kevin is the tour manager. He travels with Blake, and he's with him all the time. I'm more the advanced guy or the venue guy who works with the venue. And then we use people locally. We like to make sure that there's a cop on duty, so it's more of a team effort. I have worked with other artists who have specific bodyguards, but it all depends on the threat level and whether some artists just don't want anything. But so it's your job to kind of keep them safe without having such a big profile. No.
All right, so you kind of touched on the last answer right there, but as a road manager with Blake Shelton, what is your day-to-day operations kind of on the day of a tour? What kind of things do you do as far as the day of the show?
Well, this is a good time for me to talk about what I'm doing right now because our stage, it's a brand new production. It's being built up in Pennsylvania right now. So we had a couple guys fly out the other day. We had some carpenters fly out. Actually, some people fly out. They were the carpenters. Some more people flying today, and the rest of us fly out Friday night. So right now, we're going through all this new stuff, learning about the show. I'm designing the passes, the credentials. I'm doing the security rider. I'm doing all the flights. I'm arranging all the buses. The production manager is taking care of all the trucks. So he and I, the production manager and I, we've worked together for 20 years. So we're doing a lot of this startup stuff. Once the tour gets going, I usually get up at 9 o'clock because load-in is usually at 8. So by that time, the production office is usually set up. The cases are in, breakfast is up, and so on. It's a long day. I usually work from like 9 a.m. to midnight. So I'll go in, and the first thing I'll do, I'll think with my accounting brain, and I'll get a box office audit that says how we're doing. We'll get a sold map. That is a map of the arena, and anything that has sold is darkened in. Anything that's not sold is not, and that's useful for the production. Because this year we're doing a 360 show, but if for some reason it didn't sell out, and we didn't sell any seats behind the stage, the production now or the riggers can say, well, we don't need sound back there. So that's one of the things we get. I try to get all the comp tickets. I try to get them printed before so we have them in the morning because the guest list. Especially when it includes fan clubs and sponsors and so on, that can get kind of large. If you don't get it printed the night before, sometimes it can take till the afternoon before the box office people come in. So there's a list of things that I like to have first thing in the morning. I'll start working on a pre-settlement at about noon or 11:30. We'll start tightening up security. I like to have somebody right there at the production office with a radio that can get a hold of a supervisor. We'll have somebody at the catering room, somebody out by the buses. So I'll tell them exactly where we need these people and what time they can leave. So different phases of the day, I do different things. We're going to have 2 production assistants on board that haven't started working yet. So I'm doing a lot of the stuff that hopefully I can hand off to them.
On the subject of security riders, I just wanted to ask, is it more of a fluid negotiation between you and each venue, or is it more of something provided to you by the venue that you have to use then internal controls to work your best angle after the fact?
They take care of everything outside of the stage and the backstage area, the ushers and security for the people coming in. My rider is just 2 pages because I find if you send them a 30-page rider, they're probably not going to read it. The first page simply says it's the Blake Shelton 2016 tour. There's one support act. It's sponsored by Gildan. We have 15 trucks and I forget how many buses. There are like 10 buses. I'll tell them just a little bit about it. I'll show them a stage diagram, and we have a thrust that can go up to 44 feet depending on the seating. So I'll show them that, and on the diagram I'll show where the security guards are to be. I'll tell them a little bit about the camera policy, that we allow, of course, iPhones and stuff like that. I don't think anybody owns a real video camera anymore, but we don't do selfie sticks and iPads. I think it's ridiculous for somebody to come in with an iPad and video. So just give them some things that they need to know in advance that they can tell people. The second page is actually a staffing grid where it says at 7:30 we want somebody out at the back door, somebody with the buses, then at so on, and then if doors are at 6:30, I'll say at 6:15 we need these people around the stage. We need to lock things down going backstage. So I'll specifically say that. And if they have a question, they'll call me, but if not, we'll just go over it that day with much more detail. I'll say, I don't think we have pyro on this, but I'll tell them that there's no pyro, there's no confetti. We don't let people stand on the chairs. Try to make sure that the chairs, especially near the thrust, we don't use a barricade. If there's too much room, then people start to think, hey, we can come down and gather around. So the chairs have to be at just the right distance so that just those people can stand there. So we'll look at that once chairs are set up in the afternoon at like 1 or 2 o'clock. We'll say, man, we need to just pull these in or add some more seats here. So that's when we do the final tweaks, is the day of. Did that answer your question, hopefully?
We have a couple of questions online.
Right.
Yep. So Mick Rose, he says, or he asks, how can you go about presenting yourself to prospective employers? You mentioned your background, but what about those that have no background in security but music business instead? And then to piggyback off that, Anthony asks, do you offer any internships? So.
I get asked that a lot. In Nashville, there's a group called, it'd be helpful if I could remember it, Touring Career Workshop. And they actually have a mentorship program, and I've done this for the last couple of years, where you sign up for a year and you communicate, you email or call throughout the year, and you're kind of a resource for those people. And a lot of it is somebody who just moved to town that's trying to get into the business. Actually, one of the gals has a master's degree from here. We get people from, we were talking about this at lunch, oddly enough, we get a lot of production assistants that come from a catering background. A lot of tours carry their own caterers. We do that. And you get to know the catering staff, and if you see somebody that's a really hard worker, next time you need somebody, it's like, man, remember her or him? They're a really good worker, let's hire them. So it really helps to get to know people in the industry. If you're in Nashville, there's usually there's a CMA Fest, there's the CMT Awards. If you can get in with any of the award shows, it's good to get to learn people as well. A lot of times they're artist escorts, and they get to know the artists and the tour managers. So you really kind of have to know somebody, and you have to also have good timing. More? All right.
Yes, if you're doing a sold-out concert, do you go over the security risk, or do you go overboard with the security risk with the artist?
No, it's pretty much the same every time, because like I said at the beginning, if you have 12,000 people or 4,000 people or 400 people, it's just the one person that you're kind of looking out for. So you really don't do things any differently. And doing sold out shows is actually kind of easier to do. It's much more fun because you don't have to, especially in the accounting world, you don't have to be so tight. Yep.
Hi. First of all, hi.
Where are you? Okay.
Here I am. First of all, thank you for the talk.
You're welcome.
And if for as an example, I think last year or 2 years ago, Ultra had like a situation with all the people breaking into the area. There was a lot of people injured. What if the community targets a specific artist or group? How do you handle that bad press or bad image to the artist?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with who that is.
I mean, like the Ultra Music Festival in
Okay.
Miami.
Yeah. You know, there's an article that I just read not too long ago about decision making by security guards, that a lot of times when something like that happens, that people don't react appropriately. Unfortunately, more stuff like that is happening, or the things in Paris, but a good byproduct of that is these events are starting to step up their game a little bit more and taking their training and security a little bit more seriously. So anytime something like that happens, that's usually studied, and people try to pick up their game to prevent stuff like that. So, like I said, I don't know of that familiar instance, but
yeah, thank you.
yeah. I'm gonna look at my notes and see if I forgot anything along the way, because I'd skipped some of the last part there. Hey, here's some stories. I got a call years ago when I was with Reba that there was a guy in Northern California. He was a retired cop, and he had paid somebody to be Reba's security guy. So he somehow got a hold of us and wanted to know when the bus was going to pick him up. And we were like, man, I'm sorry, you got scammed. I don't know how. So, but he paid somebody to thinking he was going to get a job. There was another time when somebody impersonated me. He made business cards. He was giving out backstage passes. And so people showing up at the show with these passes that we'd never seen. So weird stuff like that happens. Hey.
So, say like you're standing in line with or you're standing with an artist, and there's a group of fans, and they're giving autographs or something. And you're evaluating a group of people. Like, what are you looking for that makes somebody stand out as someone who's suspicious?
That's a great question, because there's an answer. Two things. I'll look at the expressions on their face. If they're happy, having a good time and talking, that's good. If you see that they've got a serious look, then that's something to give you a warning. The other thing is to look at their hands to see what they're doing there, because anything that's going to happen is probably going to start with their hands. And we had, when I was with Reba, we did 2 headline tours with Brooks and Dunn, another popular country act. And there was a time when this big guy came in and just kind of started working his way up toward the artist. And Brooks and Dunn's tour manager went up and said, dude, you can't be in here without a pass. Just like pushed him aside. So sometimes people ask if I'd ever had any altercations. The only thing I've ever had to do was escort somebody out. And that's what I had to do with him. I just kind of redirected him and kept him moving. Because that's one of the tricks for moving somebody, is to keep them off balance and to keep them moving. Even if they're big, if they're stumbling, you can control them.
Hi, Mike.
Hi.
I'm over here on your left. I'm one of the instructors here, and I teach risk in my class.
Wow.
In particular, they choose a bunch of business ideas, and sometimes it's related to touring, where they have to figure out what risk is with their project. So there's 2 areas in particular I'd like to ask for you to expound on. One is there any areas where you absolutely only use your security? And then the second one is, you talked about online challenges and you focused on social media and information that's available, but are there any other areas that should be considered for online with touring in particular?
What was the first one?
First one was the number of, or where you may only use your security staff and not like a venue staff.
No, we always make sure there's security wherever we go, even if it's something small. We'll try to bring in a police officer. When I was with the Judds in 1991, it was their farewell tour, I hired a police officer in every town, because one thing I learned is if you have one cop with one radio call, you can get the whole department. And there was one instance in Minneapolis where we had to have, some guy had a gun, he was coming to the show and was going to kill somebody. And the guy said, man, just hold on for about 10 minutes. And 10 minutes later, he had 24 people around there. So usually, unless an artist is just going out to dinner or something like that, or going out to a club, but even if you're going out to a club, and I've got a good friend who's in the rap world and has been around forever. He's a legend, and I just had lunch with him recently, and he was telling me a story about being up in New York, and this rap artist he was with was not popular up in New York, is one of those New York, LA kind of things. And he said when he first went into the club, he went up to the security at the club and said, maybe gave him some money and said, man, I want to introduce myself. We're going to be here tonight. We're going to be partying. We're going to be in the back there. And because he did that, a couple guys came in later on, and this security guy overheard them saying that they were going to take this guy out. So he was able to go up and say, man, I want to let you know something that I just heard. So he's a great big guy. He was able to go up and say, hey, we were going to have some trouble tonight, huh? And he was able to diffuse it and get him out of there. But he said that even if the club thinks that the principal or the artist is the biggest jerk in the place, he said my job is a PR job. He says, I don't care if they like the artist, but I want them to like me. So if it's just you and your own security, then you still need to network with the people in there, if that answered that part of it. The other stuff, the social media and all that stuff, like I say, it kind of passed me by because I was in technology many years ago. But the hard part that I had grasping is how do you capture something that happens fast and electronically in order to document it. So that's something that I'm still trying to wrap my mind around now. But like I said, you've got to remember that probably more than half the stuff that you see online isn't true. Hopefully most threats aren't true, because I think they're to get attention or to create fear. We had a bomb threat with Reba, Brooks and Dunn in Tacoma one year where some guy called in and said, hey, there's a bomb. And he called it in during the last song of the show. So it was kind of funny because we were leaving anyway. And Reba was such a pro because when she came off the stage, I said, man, we don't have time to get changed. You need to go right to the car and leave. And she just said, okay. So yeah, hopefully a lot of these things don't turn out, but it's still good to pay attention to them. There you go.
You briefly explained about security and things like that, but my question is, when you hire on security, do you go like a huge background screening, and do you use like ex-military or police officers? Yeah.
Well, just like at the beginning when I talked about my martial arts background, I've been doing it for 40 years now. A lot of times martial arts will come up to me and say, man, use me for security. And I want to say, you don't know anything about security. Martial arts has nothing to do with it. Military and police are great foundations, great backgrounds, but they don't always translate. Sometimes they can be a little too rough. When I had the police on that one tour every day, I noticed how different they were. Because sometimes you can't say, hey, tell that guy he can't get an autograph. He's like, no, my job is law enforcement. If he breaks the law, I'll do something. But it's a whole different mindset, learning to work with tours and celebrities. So those things are good foundations to have. A lot of tours get them from companies that provide tour security, and the people have usually been vetted by the time they're hired by that company. Something that I didn't mention, one more thing, here is when we talk about risk, and something that we're going through right now is what's called COI, Certificate of Insurance. Every vendor that we deal with, in every building that we go to, you always have to make sure that the insurances are in line. We've got a guy in town who insures most of the tours. He'll come out to rehearsals and he'll look at the set to make sure and document it to make sure it looks safe. So insurance is a big deal in the risk world.
We have time for a few more questions. Is there anyone? We've got a few more online.
All right.
Yeah. Okay, we have one from Marty. He's curious to know your thoughts in regards to fans who follow bands for an entire tour. Is that a red flag, or is that just over the top?
Yeah. To me, it's really interesting. I always said that if I were a psychology major, that would be my doctorate thesis, is to study the psychology of a fan. Because we have people come out, mostly with previous artists, that came out to every show, and I'm like, how can you do that? How can you afford that? And what's your end game? Do you want a job, or do you want the reputation of being the top fan, or do you want to hook up with the artist? I mean, what's the deal? It's really intriguing to me. Yeah.
We have another one. I'm not sure if anyone else. Go ahead.
Hey.
Hello.
Hi.
Okay. So my question is, how different is security or security measures when you're dealing with different artists from different scenes? Like, is it the same when you're dealing with country artists or rock stars or pop stars? And how much of a say does the artist has? Like, for example, if you're talking about rock stars, one of the things they like to do a lot is like grabbing fans from the audience to take them on stage in some festivals and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Is that something that they just do out of the moment, or they actually talk to security about that?
Sometimes they talk to security, and sometimes you just know that that's the way the artist is. And an interesting story about that, as a sidebar, is an actor that I worked with years ago. If a concert has video, it's easy to do this. We say, man, just have a static camera on the stage and videotape every show and save the stage, or save the tape. And one time, this band was being sued by this woman saying, hey, they called me up on stage, I tripped, I broke my ankle. And because they were able to go back and get that videotape, they could see that the woman pushed the security guard aside, stepped up on a chair, and got up on her own. So they dropped it. So, but usually you know if that's the kind of artist that you have. But you've got to be really careful, because like I say, everyone in the audience has a phone now and is going to be filming stuff. And once they cross that border, that could lead to lawsuits. My brother, I mentioned that he did security on the Van Halen tour. And one of the head security there used to do security for the Sex Pistols. His name was D.W., Dwayne. And he said that he was guarding the biggest jerk in the place. Whenever they would go out to, a Waffle House or something like that, this guy was calling names and stuff like that. He said, man, sometimes he'd have to punch. I think he worked with Sid Vicious. He said, I'd have to knock out my own guy because he was the biggest jerk in the place. So that's the difference between, rock and country or whatever, just knowing what they're like. We just did a surprise show in Birmingham. And Blake wanted to do a rehearsal, but he thought it would be more fun to do it in front of people. So he showed up at this place in Birmingham, and he tweeted out, and people came out. And the people at the building were telling me that Marilyn Manson had just been there. And they said, man, well, we hope the carpet doesn't stink, because he's notorious for coming in and just peeing all over the place. And they have to bring in cat litter. That's what's in his rider, is cat litter. Do I have time for one more little story, a Marilyn Manson thing? A couple of Marilyn Manson things, because he's kind of intriguing to me. We followed him on tour one time. Our tour is coming right behind them. So after the security meeting, I'd say, man, tell me some Marilyn Manson stuff. And they said, man, he's a brilliant marketing guy. He would meet with our marketing department every day to find out how we would handle all the chaos and the drama. And they said he's really pretty sharp. But we were it's in Minneapolis again. What's up with Minneapolis? And I was with Reba. And I get a message that there's somebody at the backstage door and something about Marilyn Manson. I'm like, okay, what can this be? So I open the door and I see this beautiful woman with all this makeup on, and then I look over and I see this dude with more makeup on than her. And he said, hey man, my name's John Five. He's guitar player for Marilyn Manson. And he said, a lot of people don't know this, but I'm a huge country music fan. Can I come to the show tonight? So it was really kind of cool. I thought it was funny.
We have Mick. He says, or he asks, how do you handle issues with artists' friends who are causing safety issues? Have you ever encountered altercations with artists because of their chosen entourage?
Yeah, that happens a lot. And when I talked earlier about the culture of celebrity, that's what can happen when all of a sudden you're a regular guy and you're hanging out with actors and actresses and celebrities and riding in private jets and stuff. So yeah, you just have to tell the person, hey, calm down. And if you have to go to the artist and say, hey, this is reflecting bad on you, maybe you need to talk to them. And their artists are protective of their image and their career, so they'll usually get it sorted out. But that does happen.
I have a question.
Where are you?
I'm over here. Hi. Yes. You've talked mostly about touring in the United States. Have you done it internationally as well? And what security changes have you seen?
I've done some, and it's pretty similar. The acts I've been with have not been that big overseas, so it's kind of the same thing. A lot of times the promoter will provide a security person to travel with us that knows the customs or maybe the languages. The last time I went to Europe, though, it was at a time when things were kind of unstable, and I contacted a friend with the State Department, and he was able to get me names of people at the embassies or the consulates in each city. And they have what's called RSOs, Regional Security Officers. So I contacted each one, emailed, introduced myself, and said, man, I would love to have you come out to the show. And that was a good way to get to meet somebody so that in case something happens, we'd have the embassy as a safety zone there.
I got a quick question, right? Of course. How do you handle the situation if the artist himself starts becoming a little rowdy? Let's say, I don't know, he's drunk or something. He starts acting out. How do you handle a situation like that so that his image doesn't drop, and you can fix it before it gets any worse?
Yeah, luckily I haven't had to deal with that much because my thing isn't really personal security because I'm old and small. But yeah, usually the artist has a pretty close relationship with the security guy, and hopefully they have enough trust where the guy can say, "Man, we need to get you out of here now." And unless they, I'm sure there are some rock people that just don't care. Maybe in some instances, maybe it helps their image. But in the country world, it doesn't. But I think it comes down to the relationship and just trusting in your guy, kind of like, taking somebody's keys away because they've had too much to drink. If you trust the person enough, you'll comply.
Thank you for all the great questions. Mike, as we wrap up today, do you have any final thoughts or words that you wanted to share in closing?
Just know that you're on the right track. When I look through resumes to hire somebody like in an office position or even on a tour, it really stands out seeing Full Sail on that resume. And as far as getting in the business, at least in the country music and in Nashville, again, unfortunately, a lot of it depends on getting to know somebody, getting in front of somebody, and letting them see your work ethic. Because if they're long days, you have to work hard, and that's what draws attention. If you're easy to get along with and you work hard, so get in with the festivals or the award shows. If you can get in with the marketing department, get in with the tour sponsorship, anything that can get you on the road. Merchandising does work. My only hesitation with that is the merch person is usually way at the other end of the building and doesn't react or interact that much with the people backstage. So it's kind of harder to transfer from that position to the main tour.
Great. Thank you so much for all the stories and wisdom you shared today. Let's give Mike McGrath a big round of applause.
Thank you.
Mike flew down from Nashville just to be here with you guys today. So
Yeah.
Thank you so much for going out of your way to be here with us.
I want to pass this stuff on so that you don't have to learn the hard way. So I'm always available as a resource to you guys.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon, everyone.